I remember asking my mum, "Oh, mum, is MSG bad?" And my mum would like literally toss MSG into everything she was cooking at home. And she said to me, as we were driving home, if MSG was bad for us, we would have died a very long time ago. Like this is my mum's logic, and again, probably mother knows best, and I think it's flawless. But yeah, it's that attitude, that kind of resilience. I think that's what makes it kind of all click.
Today, I'm wrapping up a fortnight of discussions about anti-Asian racism. It's been a heavy 2 weeks. I've reflected a lot. I've learnt a lot. I've felt really sad, angry, and frustrated. And I've been heartened by the strength, positivity, and creativity of people I've spoken to. I'm also buoyed and strengthened by the possibility and the hope that conversations like this might, maybe, hopefully, make a difference. These chats have caused me to think a lot about my own first-generation immigrant Australian identity. As the child of a Jewish Holocaust survivor and an English Rose, hi Mum, the idea of belonging was something that was there. We didn't maybe talk about it, but we somehow knew how dangerous being an outsider was. But I'm starting to realise now that there was a kind of super Aussie strand to our family life that probably squashed a few other bits of who we are. I'm still unpicking it and thinking about it. But of course, Judaism is very different to being Asian in Australia. Jews can pass for mainstream in an English colony like Australia or in European countries. That's why they made us sew stars onto our clothing. But anyway, I am really thrilled to be finishing off this fortnight with a chat with Mike Souvanthalisith.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Mike launched More of Something Good right at the start of the pandemic impact in Australia. He runs it with his partner, Muriel Ann Rickrafrente. They are designers and food lovers based in Sydney. Mike, welcome to Dirty Linen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I liked that bit about the stars being sewn on. That was very good.
Well, it's like if you're different, but you don't look different, what do you do? I mean, there's so many ways of othering, aren't there? And I suppose making people look different with such a blunt instrument as something sewn onto clothing, that's one way of doing it.
For sure. There's huge symbolism in that act itself.
There's lots of ways of, I guess, putting people into ghettos. Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So Mike, originally from Melbourne, actually, grew up in the sleepy suburbs of Springvale, crazy melting pot of culture, I suppose, in Melbourne. It's kind of it's a nice spot that people like to go to on the weekends. But I grew up in Springvale in the 90s where, during the weekdays, it wasn't necessarily as fun. But I guess to the rough side of that, it's kind of really helped broaden my perspective on at least just more my experience of like being an Asian Australian, and now recently living up to Sydney the last 2 or 3 years, kind of slowly, I guess, relearning what that experience is for people out here as well, especially those from the West, and how different that is to, I guess, there's this very big divide here in regards to, I guess it's definitely like a class thing, if I'm going to be blunt. But that's kind of really kind of pushed me, I suppose, in terms of like the direction that I'm going in with where my life's kind of gone. I kind of grew up thinking I wanted to be an accountant or a banker or all those kind of stereotype things as a way of trying to escape, I think, the kind of rough neighborhoods and poverty that I guess we were kind of in, and somehow ended up falling into art and design, which I guess if you were to go back and tell my parents again, they would agree that it was what did they say? It translated from Lao to pretty much like a homeless person's job, which is pretty rough. It was there's a term for it in Lao, which I think carries over to Thai, which is silapin sai hang, which is just pretty much just like a drop kick kind of a job. So it was a rough couple of years convincing them that it was going to work out, but hey, here we are, and we made a cool website. I guess that's something to show.
The website is super cool. So, yeah, tell me what prompted More of Something Good, and tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, for sure. So More of Something Good, or MSG for short, is this project that me and my partner Muriel started around February, March of 2020. So this was kind of the time I think everyone had just started hearing about, the coronavirus right before Christmas. And then the holidays happened, and in Australia, everyone kind of, I guess, tried to forget about it a little bit. But once the news started picking back up, I think the thing for us that was really noticeable was all of the kind of hush chitter chatter and all of the, I guess, inappropriate jokes that would kind of go on in, either friend groups or the workplace. And it had a very familiar flavor to it. I think we couldn't put our finger on it at the time, but reflecting now, it just felt very it felt very much like high school days, where this kind of othering that was happening, people kind of talking about you without necessarily talking to you, or talking to you about you without mentioning your name per se. But that kind of energy kind of around us, we kind of started getting on our nerves a little bit. And, alongside that, we started just kind of seeing the kind of beating that the community was taking in the media. One particular example was in the Herald Sun, I'm pretty sure, on the front page, they published a story, or they published a graphic, and it was like a face mask, and it was like a red face mask that someone had photoshopped the Chinese flag over, and over the top of it, they had written pandemonium, like with the pun panda.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I remember that. It was so gross.
Yeah. So, yeah, that article was kind of part of one of the kind of like tipping points for us. That's when we actually started thinking like, oh, wow, like this is starting to turn really ugly. We were really, we were coming home after work just feeling really frustrated and really helpless. I guess, we weren't being directly affected per se, but you just had this feeling in the back of our minds of like, oh, like we can't even like go out to the grocery store, or we can't even like walk down the street without thinking twice. It felt like I was back home in Springvale in the 90s, and you couldn't walk around in the evenings anymore. And we live like in leafy Chippendale. So it was a really odd feeling, especially as stories started to kind of build up, people being kind of spat at, people getting beat up. Even there was a case where an elderly person had a heart attack, I'm pretty sure, in Chinatown, and people were just like not willing to kind of resuscitate him purely because of the fear of coronavirus coming from Asian people. So it was wild, just kind of what was happening. And the thing that I think really put everything into gear was when we found a Wikipedia link that was actually compiled articles and a whole list of xenophobic attacks against people because of coronavirus. And I'm pretty sure the list is still up, but like it was a crazy amount of articles happening from all over the world. And at that point, it really kind of put things into perspective for us. And we kind of decided, okay, like we need to, I don't know, it felt weird that we had this kind of like sense of duty to do something. But at the same time, we kind of do, I mean, we're very fortunate to kind of work in design where we just kind of sit on a computer all day. I guess that kind of guilt for us was what pushed us to like go out and do something. And we have heaps of experience, putting together exhibitions and doing these things as well. So I guess it was kind of second nature to just go like, let's get the art community together. Let's get our friends together, and let's just make something positive. Let's make something beautiful, and let's try and just shift the narrative away from what it was currently being portrayed as in the mainstream media.
Yeah, well, I love it. So everyone can look at the site at moreofsomethinggood.com or look at it on Instagram. Explain to us what it is.
It's it kind of if you jump on the website, it kind of does what it says on the tin. Maybe it's a bit exaggerated, but we kind of say it's the number one online illustrated food directory. But yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it is. The idea is pretty simple, but I think maybe that's why it works. Is we we reach out to artists, we ask them what their favorite Asian dishes are from their favorite Asian restaurants, and then they illustrate the dish and share a story, and then we kind of like plug that restaurant on maps, and then it becomes like a free online directory for people to just go and just check out all these places that people are recommending. It started out really small as well. I think we only had maybe 20 or so artists at the start. We thought it was something that we would do once and would only kind of carry for about a month or two, but we're over a year in and we've worked with over 100 artists. We've got submissions from all over Australia, maybe minus Northern Territory and Tassie. But yeah, it's created such a huge network, and through it, I think, a lot of people, we kind of put a lot of focus as well on trying to put the spotlight on artists who may not necessarily get the kind of opportunities, get these kind of opportunities. Like we try to reach out to kind of like artists who don't have as much of a renown and kind of put them side by side with some of these bigger artists, and just, kind of create a bit of a buzz and just almost introduce people to other people through it. It's kind of been a really nice community bonding experience, if anything.
Yeah, well, it is so up and positive, and it's all about stuff that people love, and the comments from the artists are quite varied. Like some of them are really simple, some of them have got an anecdote about, when I eat this I feel like this. I think they're really moving. I mean, what kind of impact do you think it has on somebody who is an artist who does one of these? Like, do you think it's what kinds of feedback have you had from the artists about how it makes them feel?
I think a lot of the time, because it's kind of I guess somewhat of a charitable kind of a thing, a lot of the big artists kind of see it as a way of kind of giving back to the community, and as a way for them to kind of like take a step away from, I guess, their kind of work, and just do something for the love of just their identity. A lot of our artists are Asian Australian as well, and so I think they really kind of see how like what they're doing is kind of feeding back in to the loop. But for a lot of the kind of younger, kind of unknown artists, I think they're just like super stoked to be part of something so big, I guess, in relative to kind of what they're kind of used to doing. I remember one of the artists talking to us, because we do a series called Good Supermarket as well, where we sell prints for the artists. And I remember one of the artists saying that they had never done prints before, which is it's kind of really nice to be able to be that kind of incubator for a lot of these people who will probably go on to do really amazing things and probably forget about us as well. But to be able to give them that stepping stone, I think is a great way to introduce them to, I guess, the more business side of the art scene. I think for us, being artists as well, and coming from that background of exhibiting, we know all too well just how hard it is for people to reach out to galleries and, create opportunities for themselves. So it's been a nice way to kind of mentor and coach a few artists through how they could go about potentially getting their work out there.
That's so brilliant. That must be so satisfying.
It's kind of paying it forward.
Yeah, so nice. And do you, from an anti-racism perspective, do you think it's made a difference?
That's a tough one to say. We don't. I wish there was a Google Analytics for a racism percentage in the population that would go down, but I guess, in my kind of experience of racism, or maybe not even racism, but like in my experience of talking to people who, I guess, are more kind of, not exposed to these kind of like things culture-wise, maybe like a little bit ignorant or just detached completely, just having that out there really makes a big difference. I think for us, we're trying not to, as much as we can, we're trying not to water down the stories, and we're trying not to water down what the artists are trying to say. We're trying to just kind of present it exactly how it is. And I think for a lot of viewers, especially kind of allies and people adjacent, they they can just kind of take it in as it is. And we're never really trying to tell people what to do either. I guess that's what makes it so good, that it's a directory. It's kind of there for people to absorb. We definitely had a lot of conversations with friends and allies about kind of MSG and what we do. And a lot of the time it's opened their eyes to just how much something is, I guess, something that a lot of people may take for granted as well on a day-to-day basis, but like food and how much it means to people and how much weight food carries from a point of view of just memories, but even just kind of culture as well and what it means for identity. It's surprisingly powerful, I think, some of the stuff that's kind of been going out. But maybe we need to do a survey to see if anyone's becoming less racist.
Are you less racist now than you were when you first looked at this site?
Yeah, I mean, I dare anybody who is racist to go to Hojak and try their char kway teow and not come out less racist. I mean, food really does that to people, I think.
I love the fact that it's MSG as well, because monosodium glutamate does have such a, I don't know, like it's such a flashpoint for people. And, you know, as it's been sort of, I guess, deconstructed in recent years, you know, this whole idea of, quote unquote Chinese restaurant syndrome, like people who think that they have a certain impact from eating dishes that have got MSG in them. And the fact that, you know, scientifically that's been, there's no scientific basis to that. And there's MSG in all kinds of foods, from tomatoes to Parmesan cheese, and there's no tomato salad effect. Tell me, I'm sure it's not accidental that it's MSG. Can you talk about your thinking there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we both kind of work in kind of the design world and around kind of branding as well. And a lot of the time we're dealing with taglines, and we've grown a huge aversion to, I guess, cliches and cheesiness. And when we started to do the project, we were adamant that it shouldn't be something that felt disingenuous, or it shouldn't feel too much like it's trying really hard to be this gatekeeper or to be this maverick for the community. Instead, we kind of thought, on purpose, we kind of chose MSG and abbreviated it to something that I guess even sounds kind of clunky too, more of something good. Just as a way of just keeping it like super authentic. Like for us, it reminded us of the language that was used on a lot of the kind of the immigrant run restaurants that we kind of grew up with in the kind of 90s, and how honest it was. Like, if anything, there's a lot of jokes that probably were made about kind of the broken English used in those restaurants. But for us, that for us is kind of such a show of resilience. You know, these people coming over, learning a second language, trying to start businesses as well to kind of feed families and create a new future for their kids. It's I think that's something that's completely overlooked, especially the aesthetic as well. Like, I think a lot of people could recognize straight away that our aesthetic was so busted and reminded them so much of, like signage outside restaurants and stuff. And, you know, coming from design, it's almost like the complete opposite of what you would ever do, because it didn't respect negative space and it was super shouty. But again, it's this idea of resilience, this idea of being economically savvy. If you only get like an A4 size sheet for a sign, why wouldn't you use the entire space to put the name of your restaurant? Like, to me, it's there's something there that I think is being overlooked, and I think there's definitely a spirit there that we're trying to capture through MSG. Wow.
I feel like I've felt all the things that you're saying, but for you to articulate it like that so beautifully, it's so clever, and I love it even more now.
I mean, it is kind of a bit of a middle finger to the anti-MSG kind of crowd as well. Like, I remember being somewhere in high school when MSG was kind of brought up in terms of like the bad effects it was having, or supposedly having, on people. And I remember asking my mum, "Oh, Mum, is MSG bad?" And, you know, my mum would like literally toss MSG into everything she was cooking at home. And she said to me, as we were driving home, if MSG was bad for us, we would have died a very long time ago. Like this is my mum's logic, and again, probably mother knows best, and I think it's flawless. But yeah, it's that attitude, that kind of resilience. I think that's what makes it kind of all click.
I love it. Can I read out one of them to you? Number 87, course meal, crispy Peking duck by Leon Truong. So it's from Old Kingdom, 82 Victoria Street, Richmond. So Leon writes, Peking duck is great, a celebration shared with family and friends over an air-blown roasted succulent duck. Anyways, I feel like white people have slowly co-opted the discussion around ethnic food, whether to prove their locality, show off their knowledge, the mind is hot, or to justify their fetishes. I'm quite impressed with how seamlessly they can integrate ethnic food into their art aesthetic. Shout out to QP Art. Even more impressed with the nuance with which they're allowed to discuss, to debate, or to love it. Whereas I feel like I'm restricted to telling a story that's only just palatable enough for white taste buds. Like that one sad anecdote about school lunch trauma, white bread envy. So, as much as I love that white people appreciate the food or the culture, it would mean so much to me if they just told me they were like jealous.
It's pretty powerful, isn't it?
That is just a punch. That is so strong.
I'm pretty sure we got Leon in on the second round of MSG. And when that quote came through, I think we had to take a step back just because, and it almost kind of made sense. Like the first round, we sent everything out. Everyone was kind of on the same wavelength, solidarity wise, sent in all these very kind of like heartfelt, lovely anecdotes. And then Leon came through and he said exactly what was on everyone's mind and probably what everybody has always wanted to say, but just would never dare to write into an artist quote. And we really loved when he sent that through.
Yeah, I think it's really strong. Yeah, I mean, did that open up another strand of kinds of artist statements in it, or did they all just sort of everyone comes at it from their own angle?
I think everyone has kind of taken like a different spin. Some people have like decided to take it down more of a kind of fantasy kind of a route. Some people have been really personal. I think with Leon's is such an interesting, an interesting hot take on kind of where the scene is at. I think there's a lot of truth in it, and there's a lot of feelings that I guess we share as well with what he's saying. And whether or not he's done this deliberately or not, but I think the way he's even written the quote, I think is genius, because in his kind of quote, he talks about this idea of identity being performative, and for the Asian Australian identity, a lot of the time we get kind of put up either on a pedestal or we get kind of like shoved onto the lower shelf in terms of like how our story is being told. A lot of the time, the stories that I'm going to say allowed, because at the end of the day, somebody has to kind of sign off on it, allowed to tell. And he talks about this idea of the classic Asian Australian story of, my lunch is different to everybody else's and it's smelly experience, which is a very valid experience for a lot of people. But I think he's talking about this almost becoming a bit of a character trope, and something that we almost kind of like put out, or the kind of stories that we have to tell, or the ones that I think are the less spicy versions of our experience that are more palatable for white people. And he does that in his quote, with the start of his quote being, this is what roast duck is, and isn't it lovely, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, and then he cuts into actually how he really feels. And I think a lot of the time there's especially kind of, I talk about it a lot with friends, how I guess for us, especially people who've come in on the kind of later wave of immigrant parents around like the 70s and 80s, or mostly from kind of Southeast Asian countries, we don't have the luxury of kind of being here for a long time, that we have like an established community per se. But we also are in the in-between phase, right when the internet started, where you can very easily find your community and your people now online to share stories. We're kind of a little bit of the odd part, where obviously I think the next generation for us are probably going to have a little less trouble than we are. Like, I've already heard stories about friends of friends who are packing their kids like homemade versions of, white friends of friends who are already making their versions of banh mi to kind of like for their kids to take to preschool and stuff, like they're already eating kimchi in the household and stuff like that. Like that wasn't a thing for us. And I think that's kind of why that story, and for Leon to point it out, is slowly not becoming a real kind of shared narrative anymore. And yeah, I guess we're also not a monolithic culture either. It's so varied. I think there's an anger from him as well that's about kind of the nuances in which we can talk about food, and I guess a bit of a gripe, I suppose, in which when we do share these stories and when they are absorbed by kind of white people, they kind of get to take it in and then they get to reshare it in their way. And we almost are forced to applaud them for telling us our stories back to them. And they have this range that they're allowed to tell this, to retell stories. But for us, we're so limited in terms of what we can do. I remember when on MasterChef, there was this one episode where it was like an all Asian cast, and it was such a huge deal for people, and everyone was like, yeah, representation. And then the comedian Ronnie Cheng was like, yeah, isn't that great? Like that's an all Asian cast for a TV show, but the Asians have to cook. That's the only way they can have the spotlight. And I think, as harsh as that is, I think there is something to that, especially in Australian media, where yes, you can have your diversity quota, but you have to be doing the things that we are okay with you doing.
Yeah. Wow. That's killer. So it's really interesting. One of the people that was there cooking on that day was Khan Ong, and we chatted to him on the podcast last week. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. He said that they didn't realize that, they were having a moment until it was pointed out to them. They were just there doing their thing in the throes of the competition. It wasn't really, they were just in it. It wasn't perhaps time to reflect. But yeah, I don't know. I watched that and I loved it. And I think it was because the host, Melissa Leong, felt it and pointed it out. And I think, I guess she wasn't there cooking. She was there like running the show. And that was really cool. But yeah, I guess representation is just, it's just part of the story, isn't it? It's not the answer. It's like people have to be, represented and present, but they have to be doing what it is they want to do, and they have to be there being, allowed, as you say, to be who it is that they want to be, and then, and then to change that and be someone else if they want to be someone else. It's just, presence isn't the end of it. That's for sure.
Totally. And, just kind of being that kind of in between kind of generation, I think a lot of us, I don't want to speak I don't want to speak for everybody, but for me specifically, I'm very much a cynic when it comes to this kind of stuff. Even though we try to do as much positive work as we can, it's almost when we see it, our first gut reaction is always to be skeptical. Like, what's the motivation, or how did they get this over the line? What are they getting out of this by doing it? Which is kind of sad that that's our first reaction. I think I'm hoping that like all the work that we do now for the next generation, they aren't as cynical. They kind of see it more as a norm, and they are able to kind of properly celebrate it, unlike I do. I remember. I don't think it was a quote in a book, but it was actually a friend, another writer, Emma Doe. We tried our hand at a podcast a very, very long time ago. We only did one episode. It didn't go anywhere. It was terrible. But the one great quote that I remember I pulled out of that was Emma talking about how right now we have to do these things of almost forcing representation and, for the lack of a better words, kind of having diversity quotas. But for us, we just have to kind of grit our teeth and kind of let that happen, because that's what's going to lead to the progress. And that's what, eventually down the line, we won't need to have quotas and we won't need to force representation, because it will just naturally be there. But right now we're in the toughest part of it, and it's real growing pains for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, well, I guess if you look back on human history, you can see, well, the fights that have been won are almost invisible. I mean, it takes, the fact that women have got the vote, or that you don't have to, I don't know, own property to vote, all those things that people fought really hard for. Those fights almost get erased by their success. But I guess there's also a real danger in that, because it's really easy for, I guess, freedoms and rights and opportunities to be chipped away at. There's I guess a real push and pull between being really embedded in the fight and remembering what you're fighting for, and then, I guess, celebrating the victory by stopping fighting and forgetting about it.
Totally. I think that's what's so valid about the work of the work that people do to kind of preserve all that history too, or to what's the word? I remember Leah from Liminal actually said to me about how important it is to kind of keep artifacts of movements and of moments. So whether they be the flyer for an all Asian panel, or whether it is the YouTube video, or even the podcast episode of people talking about these things, like, we need to store them in some way, shape, or form, almost time capsule them a little bit, and make sure that they're there, ready and available for people, so that they can look back on it and just go, yeah, look how far we've come. Because when you're right up at the edge, at the forefront of it, you can't see the forest for the trees, right?
Totally. I mean, it makes me think of something like Labor Day, or statues about, there's a statue in Melbourne celebrating the 8-hour day. You just think, well, there's a lot of people that are working more than 8 hours a day, but and we have the public holiday, but we really actually should stop and think about it. That's just one example. There are so many. So Mike, what do you reckon is going to create the change that we want to see?
I don't know if it's going to be MSG. To be honest.
I reckon it's definitely part of it. You cannot discount. I don't think you can discount anything with this stuff. It's just opening one person's eyes, even just a little bit, I think you just don't know where that's going to go.
I think it's, for me at least, my kind of hope is to see kind of more things, if not MSG, more things like MSG. I think pre-digital age and also pre-COVID, there was a lot of gatekeepers for a lot of things. Whatever industry you were trying to break into, there was always someone you had to ask to get through it. And then it usually was a very small circle or clique of people who made it, and a lot of people who were left out. But nowadays, people can literally start their own anything online. I feel like such a boomer kind of talking about it like this, but it's so true. Like, I remember listening into a conference that was being organized online, and it was called Where Are the Black Designers, I believe. And one of the speakers actually spoke about how, acknowledged the fact that they were hosting that conference online, and were able to get so many people on board and so many people viewing, with such a show for how much of a reality it is to actually find your community online, and that you don't need to go through the status quo anymore. Like, you can completely negate your preconception of like getting into the industry, or even just kind of finding or even having to have your platform certified or validated by particular people. You can literally do everything yourself now. And I think through all of these smaller conversations, they will just multiply and create a reverberation that I think will osmosis a little bit. Like the conversations that are kind of happening are so kind of overlapping and intertwined now that's kind of how I see the change happening. It's almost letting us tell our own stories to each other without watering it down. And just naturally, everything else will kind of like go alongside with it, I think.
I just love that. I think that's, really powerful, and that really resonates. And it's also very optimistic, which I love.
Yeah, says the cynic, right?
Oh my God, you're becoming, your glass is getting so full, Mike.
I think you have to be overly optimistic, not only want to see, I guess, the change, but also to do this kind of work. Like, I think if you talk to anybody who's out there, either whether they're doing a project or not, like anybody who's kind of in this field trying to figure all of this out and to go through all those tough conversations, it's not easy, and it takes a huge toll on people, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And I think if you're not, I think no matter how cynical people are in kind of that field are, they are like crazy optimistic. You have to be, I think, to want to do it. It's painful work. As rewarding as it is, it's more pain than it is reward. But I don't know. There's a kind of self-sacrifice element to it. Maybe it's a kind of for the greater good, kind of a drive. But that's kind of my point of view. At least that's how I kind of take it on. Maybe it's forcing myself to sound stoic, but I think it's more kind of unlearning all of the mistakes I made probably when I was a kid who didn't know any better, with a lot of regrettable things said and done. You have to be optimistic to want to change not only the world, but yourself too.
Mike, wow. Beautiful words and great sentiment. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Go support your local Asian restaurants. We're still as weird as it is in Melbourne and Sydney to be able to walk around out now and see people kind of like dancing at clubs, like shoulder to shoulder. We are still very much in a post-pandemic world with a lot of kind of strain on things. A lot of very good, iconic restaurants that have been there for decades on end have disappeared, and that's a huge chunk of history that we will never get back. There are very particular techniques for those type of foods that if someone doesn't open a restaurant for it, you never see it outside of the home. So I implore everybody to take a drive out to the burbs, go to a place that you've never been before, try a restaurant you've never tried before that doesn't have any Zomato reviews, and just, open your mind up and support the artists on more of something good. They're the real stars, not us.
Mike, it's been such a pleasure and a privilege to talk to you. Thanks for bringing your energy and indeed your optimism to this conversation. I really appreciate it. It's been so great to have you on Dirty Linen today.
No, thank you very, very much. It was awesome.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtyLinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This